In 1840, the First Opium War broke out between China and Great Britain. Over 3,000 people were killed in this colonial quest for profit. Unfortunately, this bloodshed is not a lone incident in the dark history of opium, a plant with extraordinary properties that has given rise to medications that can be found in nearly every hospital on the planet, has also been used as a tool in the demise and destruction of the colonized, victimized, and exploited. A pattern that has been seen throughout history still holds true today with the modern day opioid epidemic, though opium's rich history starts well before that. The opium poppy, also known as Papaver somniferum, originates in the Mediterranean region of Eurasia, likely in modern-day Iraq or Turkey. There is an abundance of evidence showing that opium has been used medicinally for thousands of years, even dating back 8,000 years, where clay opium tablets were prescribed in Sumerian culture. There is evidence of use in nearly every ancient civilization one could think of. Opium remnants have been found in Egyptian tombs, Greek physicians wrote of the plant's properties, and it was used to treat eye disease by the Arabs. This plant has a history filled with stories of healing, of pleasure, and of addiction. This story is different. It's about oppression and the ways that opium has been used to extract capital. Our story starts with another plant, tea. Camellia sinensis, or the tea plant, is native to Southeast Asia, and the culture of drinking tea originated in China. As trade opened up between the East and the West, a three-way trade was developed between China, Great Britain, and colonial India. China sent goods to Great Britain in exchange for silver, while India, which was under British control at the time, sent cotton to China. As Chinese goods found themselves thousands of kilometers away from their origin, British consumers developed a liking for tea in particular. Tea at the time was a highly secretive business, as the dynastic government of China saw the value that tea had in this trade. Furthermore, the lack of interest in British goods meant that this trade heavily favored China. This imbalance played a large role in Britain switching from cotton to opium in hopes of turning the tables. The switch was helpful in doing just that. With an increase in the production of opium in India, the role of the trade was reversed, and now it was China who had to pay silver. While this may have been an economic success for the crown, the impact on the people of India was immense. At the time, India was for the most part under the control of the East India Company. The company established its first trading post in 1612 and through countless wars, gradually expanded its range until it had control over nearly all of India. Indian farms produced a wide variety of crops, from barley, wheat, rice to tobacco, indigo, and opium. But as the company further supplemented the tea trade with opium, more and more farms were converted into opium farms. Unfortunately, growing poppies, especially on a small farm, was an incredibly labor intensive and often low yielding process. And at the time, the Opium Department of the East India Company coerced Indian farmers into growing opium against their will under the threat of violence. This opium department was incredibly coercive, exploitative, and unequal. The total salary of all Indian employees was less than half the salaries of the white staff, and there were 30 times as many Indian employees as white employees. The department contractually obligated all farmers to transport their crops in their entirety at their own cost, all while the price of opium remained at 3.5 rupees for a seer, which is about a kilogram. Not to mention, many of the farmers started using opium and became addicted to it during this time. With low yields, the high cost of production, and the bribes necessary, most farmers were losing money with every harvest. With so little money to be made, farmers began to sell their crops on the black market, returning higher prices. But this caught the attention of the higher ups, and the company got much stricter on farmers. Farmers who missed their quotas were entered into a registry, and the company's vast number of spies and informants were constantly in surveillance of all opium farmers. These policies have impacted the people of India today as well, with economist Abhijit Banerjee showing that regions subjected to the East India Company's land tenure system have lower investments in health and education. This system allowed unequal pay that heavily favored the white employees and allowed massive amounts of money to be extracted from the peasant farmers that were unwillingly subjected to this colonial force, a force that drastically changed the environment of India today, all in the name of profit and opium. Now, it is clear that opium has had massive historical impacts on the humans that it surrounds, but what properties of opium allow this plant to be so powerful? Opium contains a variety of compounds known as opiates, namely morphine and codeine. These compounds have evolved the incredible ability to bind to the mammalian mu opioid receptor, meaning nearly all mammals have a biological response to the plant. Our response as humans includes pain relief, which is the reason for the widespread medicinal use of opioids. But opioids also cause a sense of euphoria, which is how they have become known as some of the most addictive substances on Earth. We have been able to exploit these properties and synthesize new opioids that are even stronger than those found in the plant. Heroin, oxycodone, fentanyl, and even naloxone are all synthetic opioids. Despite the fact that opioids have become much more powerful in recent history, the effects of the user remain. An article from Johns Hopkins Medicine says that opioid abuse can cause difficulty with family, interpersonal relationships, and other aspects of life can grow worse as the disorder progresses. These drugs will help and cause harm in the same way, no matter the race, time period, or financial position of the person who uses these substances. This view of opioids is not just centralized to now. There was a general dismay of opium that was widespread in Southeast Asia during the 18th and 19th century in Siam, Vietnamese, Indonesia, and China. The Chinese Repository, a periodical published from a missionary in Canton at the time, detailed the general view of opium, saying, "The youth who smoke will shorten their days and cut off all hope of posterity, leaving their fathers and mothers and wives without anyone to depend." This is in the section that says opium exhausts the animal spirit. The other sections say it impedes regular performance of business, it wastes the blood and the flesh, it dissipates every kind of property, it renders the person ill favored, it promotes obscenity, it violates the law, and it attacks the vitals, and it destroys life. Despite the fact that history can seem so foggy, people hundreds of years ago knew that opium abuse destroyed the mind, body, and soul. On at least three separate occasions from the 1730s to the 1830s, China banned the import and production of opium, an act that was opposite to the interests of the British. Despite the laws and knowledge of the devastation of opium, the colonial quest for silver continued by smuggling opium into China and other Southeast Asian countries. In Siam, or modern-day Thailand, the plant was banned in its entirety due to the vast use in the country. Unfortunately, this did not deter British smugglers, who continued to sell their product to the Siamese people. There was a very harsh ban on opium in Vietnam as well, but it did not last due to the advanced naval technology of the Western powers, leading both Vietnam and Siam to give in and allow trade into their borders. Those were not the only Asian countries experiencing an opium problem. British jumped through many hoops in order to sell their opium to the Chinese market. Rather than selling opium directly to China, it was auctioned off to private traders, absolving the East India Company of responsibility. These traders would then smuggle the product into China. As Chinese authorities became stricter, the traders began meeting Chinese smugglers at small coastal islands so that their ships were empty by the time they arrived at customs. This continued to a breaking point, where this man, Lin Zexu, had enough. He was a provincial emperor who argued that the opium trade was a moral evil, and he oversaw the enforcement of the opium ban. He wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, questioning her morality. He also arrested hundreds of Chinese opium dealers and destroyed massive amounts of opium paraphernalia. Under his supervision, the Chinese detained foreign merchants and seized the thousands of kilograms of opium from smugglers. Then, the chests of opium were destroyed. In a very similar fashion to the Boston Tea Party, this incited a war. This was the prompting event of the First Opium War. This war was incredibly one-sided, Britain's maritime power leading to decisive victory after decisive victory, culminating in the 1942 Treaty of Nanjing, a treaty that forced China to pay millions, opened ports to traders and smugglers, and that ceded the island of Hong Kong, which became a hub for illegal opium trading. The first of many unfair treaties, in what is known as China's Century of Humiliation. With resistance to their trade crushed and a new deepwater port in the form of Hong Kong, British were able to increase their opium imports into China year after year, creating an air of apprehensiveness between the nations. With the lack of barriers to trade into China, Britain was once again able to rake in an uncountable sum of money from this trade. According to Tanchang, the opium trade accounted for a whopping 16 to 20% of the entire British Raj's revenue on paper, and in reality, it was most likely accounting for even more than that. The trade of this deadly, devastating substance was a cash cow for the crown. This massive entity utilized the addictive potential of this unique plant in order to extract millions in profit from the people of Southeast Asia. The company utilizing substances like opium in order to extract capital is a pattern that is not endemic to the 17th century. A dark parallel has been seen in recent history with the release of Oxycontin from Purdue Pharmaceuticals. Oxycontin is a formulation of oxycodone, allowing for a sustained release,
and despite research showing that it was equally effective as other opioid formulations, the company decided to aggressively market the drug. From inviting physicians to all expensive paid symposiums to lucrative bonuses for salespeople, Purdue Pharma clearly intended to maximize profit from this novel formulation. They marketed to physicians who were undertrained in the issues of pain management and addiction, and undersold the risk of addiction associated with Oxycontin. One of the most egregious methods of marketing was the free limited time prescription lasting from a week to a month, giving plenty of time for the user to create a dependent on the substance before leaving them with crippling addiction that funds Purdue Pharma. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 4 out of 5 heroin users began by misusing prescription opioids. The blatant negligence of this multi-million-dollar company is the direct cause of death, suffering, and addiction of millions of people, all while bringing in an absurd amount of money. This is the crystal structure of the mu opioid receptor, and this plant, opium, has by pure evolutionary chance created an array of compounds that bind and activate this receptor. These unique properties give this non-sentient plant power over a species that often seems to control everything around it. It controls those that use and those that distribute. It is a tool of colonialism and exploitation.
Binding that causes a
It is a
decrease in the
commodity that
levels
has
of
turned
cyclic
millions into
AMP in the
money.
cell, which
It is
creates the
unique in
downstream
these
effects of
senses.
analgesia
Opium,
and
a
euphoria.
magnificent medicine and a mechanism to extract profit from people.